So I'm Brian Postlethwaite from Microsoft Research. If you can't tell by the accent, I'm not Irish, I'm Australian. And I'm here to talk about questionnaires and SDC. So if you've been to one of these sessions in the past, I've given similar talks at other DevDays. But this year I've sort of trimmed it down a bit and added new content in. So this is not a repetition of stuff you've already seen if you haven't. So if you're new, this is all great content. And we'll get cracked straight in. So who am I? Brian Postlethwaite, Senior Software Engineer at Microsoft Research. I'll keep reading my slides. And that's a photo of me when I finally actually made it to the head office because I'm down in Australia and I work remotely. So it's a nice change. I've been doing structured data capture since pre-DSTU2 with questionnaires. So that's like nearly almost 10 years. So we've done quite a lot with them. I've been on the form design, the spec driving, and a bunch of tools which you'll see today. I'm also on the FHIR management group and a co-chair at patient administration and help work on the actual spec. So what are we going to learn today? Really, what is SDC, structured data capture, SDC? That's sort of where that comes from. We'll go through the questionnaire basics, so labels, fields, groups, tables, really the primitive parts that go with it, and then walk into dynamic questionnaires, so how to go from just a static representation of a paper form into something that's more smart and is more dynamic and what users expect from a forms engine these days. And then walk through validation, how do we validate, when do we validate, and then canonical URLs and version management, which if that means nothing to you right now, I'm hoping at the end you'll go, I understand. So then close out with what tools are out there. So what do I use? What can you find? Who else has got stuff? And because we had Diego in the start says, every hour we must include something about AI. So I've got a little AI section at the end. So here we go. So before we jump in, so there's some pretty typical workflows that you'll find in, that is a bright sun. Ta-da! So yeah, there's a pretty simple workflow for getting in and using questionnaires. Basically, we have to find a questionnaire that we're going to use. You not always just start with a questionnaire, you need to discover it. You're going to load that questionnaire and render it. You might have some context that's relevant, so you're doing it in the context of a patient, their demographics, or it might be an encounter. You might have the practitioner that's entering in, so you can do some pre-population on that content to try and speed up the data entry process. Then you've got that boring section where the actual user interacts with the form and enters that data, and during which you'll get some validations that happen while it's going on, because it really sucked to get the end of a 12-page thing and go, here is your ream of errors that you need to go and resolve. So yeah, we want that as it goes through, which is really neat. And then the response gets validated by the server as you submit it, and then you've got the structures. And then we'll go and post that, or once we've finished it, we're going to send it somewhere, and then we'll possibly do other activities with that content once it's saved. Typically extracting all or parts of that content into other FHIR resources so I can do further activity with it. So I might pull some of the content out into observations, or I might create a condition, or who knows what. More on that section in my other session on Thursday on pre-population and extraction. Cool. So what is SDC? So it's the Structured Data Capture IG. It's currently at version or release 3, which is based on R4 of FHIR. So SDC 3, FHIR R4. We do plan to do an R5 version, but all of the implementations, well, all of them up to a month or so ago, were basically all on 4. So we hadn't done a 5 version of the IG yet, but that will be coming. So we're going to do one more release of the SDC guide to catch up with all the changes that we've been doing, and then we'll move on to a 5 version. So we've got a form filler, which is the user that goes and enters content, a form manager, which is really about the storing of questionnaires and how you go and access them, so versioning, validation, all that sort of content, response manager. So each of these different components is described in the SDC IG so that you can get that granularity of we just want to resolve what is the form management side of things, or we just want to deal with the form validation and the atomic data side, so you can have those completely separate. And yeah, it really is a full set of extensions in the true sense of the word extension from FHIR, but also behaviors and functionality, which is defined in that IG. And there's a link to it. If you haven't already been there, I highly encourage, go look at it, but all good. And so from this point forward, basically, SDC and FHIR questionnaires is really the one thing. So we didn't put it all into the base spec because we wanted SDC to move more quickly than the base spec and be that. So that's why. So questionnaire basics. So questionnaires really split into two parts: the questionnaire resource, which is the definitional content, so which is there, which is basically similar to a structure definition. It describes these are all the fields in the form, and this is all the behaviors that are associated, and it might include references off to terminologies. So if you see that little link, I hope you can read it. It says questionnaires have item options to value sets, and then we have questionnaire responses, which is that collected data that the users entered, or systems entered. We won't be discriminatory there, and they'll reference back out to a subject, which is typically a patient, but doesn't have to just be a patient, which is cool. And that sort of mirrors the normal resources that would conform to a structure definition. So the one thing, so I've got that nice big note at the bottom, don't profile questionnaires normally. There are a few reasons why you might want to profile questionnaires. So if you're wanting to say, as a system, we support this subset of extensions, then okay, that's a reason for creating a profile on questionnaire so that you can test any questionnaires that people create to say, okay, yep, that will work with my renderer. So that's a valid one. If you say, I want to create a vitals form or an admission form, that's not a role for creating a structure definition or a profile on questionnaire. Just create the questionnaire. Cool. I'm not going to read all of this, but this is just the set of all of the item types. So any item in a questionnaire is going to have one of these types associated with it. So you can have groups, displays, all the normal atomic field types that you'd expect. And then we've got things like value codings or strings or attachments so that you get that level of detail. So a lot of stuff in there, and there are multiple user controls that you could associate with any one. So you could look at something like a coding. So here, a coding could be a radio buttons, it could be a drop list, it could be an autocomplete style lookup. But I'll jump into that a bit further. So it's, yes, item types almost map to control types, but there is a bit of a fuzzy edge there on a few of them. So dynamic questionnaires. So what do I class as a dynamic questionnaire? It's stuff that's a little more than just your vanilla fields and different tabs. So we associate it into terminologies so that you can reference an existing set of codes. They can be either contained within the questionnaire, or they can link out and reference to an external set. Variables, expressions, queries, calculated fields. The number of form systems that I've seen where they go, yeah, we've got this, but we just want to add some customization to say, I need this field plus this field divided by this field equals this result. And so they go and get some JavaScript and put it in. Not very interoperable. So we've got the capacity to include variables and expressions using the FhirPath language. And the FhirPath language, I've got a section on another presentation coming up. So answer expression is another one, along with dynamic labels. So if you want the label of a field to change based on other content, you can do that. So if you want to say, if they've selected a specific state, for example, you're putting that in, you could then change a label further on in the questionnaire to sort of tweak the description of that label for that kind of detail. That's pretty cool. And the one I use most of all is constraints. So those powerful custom validations to say this field must always be less than this field, which must always be less than this field, or in these conditions, hide these other fields. There's all that sort of stuff. But that's enough talking on that. And here's the terminologies. So I will be demonstrating the majority of all of this because I know talking just gets so boring for me, and it's very exciting. So the questionnaires, so we've got item types, choices, open choices. So this is just how we link into it. And when you're putting a choice question into a questionnaire, have a think about the terminology you're binding in there when you make that selection on which control I should use. If I've got 3 or 4 fields, radio buttons, perfect. If I've got the entire SNOMED set of conditions, not cool for radio buttons. If I've got a set of, 100 countries to list, yeah, radio buttons, no. A drop list, yeah, that's good. So my SNOMED set, what should I do for that? An autocomplete style lookup. So just put text box, you type into it, and you type whatever it is, and it will just look ahead in the background, grab that coding and put it in. And then there's the open choice, which is basically if it can't find it, it's fine just to have a string value. Super cool. And a whole bunch of extensions which all fit into that. Item control is what I was referring to. You can have option exclusive to say if we've got this field, so if you select a multi-choice and then have all of the above or none of the above or something like that, you can say if they select this one, you can't choose these other options. So pretty neat. Enable when is a great feature. So I'm going to hopefully leave that one for demonstrating, but basically if this field has this value or with this operator, show it or don't show it. Really neat. Validation. So I think this is the last one before I jump into actual demos, because that's going to be much more exciting. So validation, there are multiple stages of validation. So you've got your raw FHIR XML or JSON serialization. So inside the renderer, you can do all your internal validations, but if I go and send it to a server for validation there, it's going to check, is this valid content? Then it's going to say, is there a FHIR profile that's in scope? I'll validate that. Yep, tick, great. Then we're going to do the questionnaire response validation, which is going to match up the item to the definition and say, okay, does this link ID exist in the definition? Yes, no. Is it the correct type? Yes, no. Is it a terminology? Is it in the set standards? Yes, no. So you sort of walk through that, and then it will do more of those extended validations, so with the custom validations, and great. And how is that communicated back from the server? Is through an operation outcome resource. And so that comes back, and that has the details of the content to show the user. And I know if you've seen a lot of the other validations, they can be pretty esoteric, what's coming back. Whereas with questionnaires, we want that validation to be user-friendly. So there's a lot more effort gone into those messages. And then the location of that issue so that you can get straight from the error to the actual item on the screen. And here's an example of an operation outcome. So we can see it's got the operation outcome. It's got 2 issues in it. One's an error saying that this particular field is required. Mandatory field severity is missing. And that's the actual path to that specific issue. So if I was creating an UI to show that, that's the error message I'd show, and I'd be putting it on the control that represents that location, which is neat. And I'll look at this next one. So we've got past only and cannot be a future date. So that's from a specific expression, so which has been custom generated for it. Really cool. Oh, my favorite part, demos. And as with all, about, what was it, an hour ago, I had a mild heart attack. My server completely crashed, and I go, oh, great, perfect timing. So I'm going to hope that the demo gods are with us today. And yes, it's back, thank goodness. All right, what was I showing? Bit of everything. So this is just a set. So if you get the slides, click on the links in there, and that'll take you to, this is the FhirPath Lab's forms testing area. And it's got a hyperlink to say show these specific forms. So if you look up there in the URL bar, I don't know if you can actually see that, but there's the URL to a form definition, which is that. You see that? That's all cool. All right, so I'm going to expand that out so I can show side by side, lock that down. And so here's a rendering using the CSIRO's forms rendering engine of a specific questionnaire. And so I can say here's the string field, which looks like link ID, string type. Here's a text field. So I'll note that a text field is of type text, whereas a string, so single line string, multi-line string, pretty neat. Here's my item boolean. So they render it as a set of radio buttons. It's perfectly valid. And here's my date. So it's pretty neat that you can get to wander through and check this stuff out. And we can also do things like change this display label, live at DevDays. Yeah, it works, excellent, even better. And we can also see, well, this same form rendering, we can see in the LH Forms engine. So someone was asking me, are you doing the forms? Are you just doing the LH Forms? And I said, no, but yes. So that's cool. So the idea is that this tool's for testing out definitions so we can get there and switch. And this is also an internal one on my local machine, so you can need a local host up there. So this one's FhirPath Lab / questionnaire tester, whereas this one's local. And we have the AidBox engine, so I'm working with them. They're doing most of the work. I'm just taking all the glory and putting that on the top there as well. So you can get the same form definition shown there. So that's all kind of neat. But let's get back and see some of these other more exciting ones. So we can have groups. So CSR rendering. So these are groups, so a couple of fields grouped together, and then a contacts with a set there. And if I go and add some data, we can then include multiple. So you can get those repetitions, which is really nice. Okay, so we'll go to tabs. So hopefully, yep. So this is a case where we've got 2 tabs. Obviously not a great example of a form that requires tabs. Don't exactly need one field for a tab, but it's capacity. So this is one of my other favorites for rendering terminologies. Let me show both side by side. So this one is for people who understand. So there's more than one way to embed a terminology. So I'm just showing a few of the options. I have a giggle there, don't know. That's probably not at me, unless they were looking at the other definitions. So we can embed the options. So if you don't have a value set, you can just shove them in. We can link straight to a contained value set. We can go via a canonical out to, so there's our item control saying we want to use a drop-down, which is cool. And then you can link to other value sets. But if you want to go and look further on those other examples, highly encourage it. Enable when, so let's look at those. So this capacity, let's just include that to the left. or to the left. So when we get a value, so we can show and hide. So that's the sort of thing that you end up getting. And that one's required. So you get that sort of idea that it's pretty advanced, the sort of things you can do. So I can select A, and it'll show, or B, and you get different ones. So that's a little example on that. Just to show what does a no. So CBD risk. So this is an evaluation. Lock that in. So I'm going to excitedly fill out a form and give away some exciting features. 120, actually, this is pretty stressful. We'll call that that. And I might start smoking after this. 12. Apparently he's got diabetes too. And so I can see as I go through and change these values, that's an example of those evaluations to calculate what is the actual risk. And so we get the CVD score rounded up, and there's a whole bunch of expressions that all build into that logic. So, which is really nice. And another one of my favorites, the pain scale, because this can be painful sometimes. We can go, I'm getting severe vocalization, and we can see the little number down here is increasing as we go down, and you can see that sort of calculation. So it's the same sort of expression again, but this one actually shows that you can have a chain between this one and this one. So even though these combo boxes have a score in behind each of them, they contribute to get a total value, but then this total pain score looks at that total calculated value and says if you're between a 13 and a 15, then you're considered severe. So you can sort of chain expressions, which is really neat. Validation, so 2 more. So what did I validate in this one? Yes. So 1 value plus 2 value gives me 3. And I'm going to say that this was, we're going to review this yesterday. Let's show that response, because that's always fun to review something the day before. Now, this is going to validate. So what it's done is it's taken, so remember that set where we had, you can pass it through to a server to do validation, and it will send back an operation outcome. So this is the results of that operation outcome. And it's telling me that you need to have one of those. So there was a mandatory field I missed, and that review date needs to be in the future. So let's change that and put it back in the future and show that response and validate that. And now we just have that other issue. So if I put it back and go, well, why did that come back as a warning? Shouldn't that be an error? So the issue is, that's marked as in progress. So when you're saving a questionnaire response, you might be putting a draft away as in progress to say, I'm only halfway through this form, I've got another patient that I need to go and rush to, I don't want to leave this open, so you dump it and you leave it in progress. You'll get those warning messages, but that's, so when I go and mark that as completed and do that same validation, that's now become an error. So I have to mark that before I can close that out, which is kind of cool. And as a debug tool, even though there's only a handful of fields here, I can click and see where is that date, there's the date. So it's a nice UI there to try and help you debug what's wrong with this rendering. Is it a problem with my data? Is it a problem with my engine? Really nice capacity there. And one lucky last one, really big form. So forms can get quite large. And just to help highlight that, I've got a capacity here to show some other secret areas. Not really secret areas, it's just sort of some extra capacity to see what was a list of fields. So long list of fields. And you can click on them, so if you want to navigate around to see what's going on, it's a nice, neat way to get in there. Is there pre-population? There's a heap of that. Are there variables? Yeah, there's a heap of that. but we'll have a look at the rendering. And so you can see there it's big, it's got lots of tabs to get in there. And how does that render in other engines? So the LH Forms doesn't do a tab style UI, but we still get a representation of that form to complete. So it's a nice way to see how is this rendered across from one to the other. Excellent. So, canonical URLs and version management. So this canonical URL, so we look at the base URL here. It's just the URL which is referencing this specific form definition. And then on the end here, so that vertical pipe 02, that's the business version, so not a resource history, so update, 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 they're little resource versions. This is the canonical version or business version of that. So some jurisdictions will have a yearly iteration of an assessment. And so the yearly iteration would be that last set of digits, but the form or the instrument is that URL. And it doesn't matter which system you go to, that will always be the same. So if I want to go and build it in my pre-prod or development environment, I can use a specific URL here, and then when I deploy that into my production environment or my training environment, it's the same value. So it's not a URL that's intended to resolve, it's just something you need to know about. And that's a lovely little picture. And just coincidentally, we have the nice display of this specific one, this big one. We've got a handful of different versions that have been draft and active and retired. You might have two of these active at the same time. So you can have, especially when you're going through an iteration where we're in that interlapping period where the previous and the next is. So that's a really good part about those. Cool. There's modular forms and assemble. I'll leave that as a teaser for go and explore on your own in the SDC guide. But modular forms are a capacity to have subforms and then assemble those together into a large form. So if you've got a common patient demographics tab, you can put that in a modular form and then assemble stuff later. Awesome stuff. And so that is a nice confusing diagram. And I include that here because it's a pretty typical situation where you end up having some stuff distributed from HL7 International, like value sets and code systems, from SNOMED, from LOINC, and then international terminology services, and then regional terminology services local to your health system or your area, and then into your individual hospital. So questionnaires are everywhere, but also all sorts of canonical content. Wow, that's quite a few of the implementations that are out there. I'll point that AidBox is new to the scene in there, which is really good to see, and there's quite a few others on the list. Do come, explore, and there's a section in chat.fhir.org for questionnaires, which you should come and ask us about stuff. And similar, there are quite a few form builders. So the NLM's forms builder is pretty well known by now, and there are a few others that are getting some leverage. Cool. Open source projects. So this is predominantly all of my contributions. So if you're in the TypeScript or the .NET stack, I've got you covered. The testing areas, that's all in there as well. Now, I don't know how much time I've got left. That's 5 minutes, excellent. So I've got 5 minutes and then we can get to questions. So generative AI and forms. So the lab itself has, if we go there, so I've added into it, where are we? Let's close down some of these things so I can get back to, oh, this looks good. So I've added an AI chat style capability. Let me swap that over to that side, keep it locked in. So I've added a capacity for a chat style interface into there. So you can then go and edit questionnaire definitions. So my tooling is not around how do I debug, how do I do this sort of stuff, but I want to sort of get an experience to say, well, what's going on here? So I can go click on that error and I picked the right window at the right time. Let's try this one. So instead, let's put AI chat over there and lock it in and say something like, create a new form to capture patient basic demographics and a second group for contacts with name, relationship, and email. Does that sound like a good form? Pretty useful. And he hopes he actually has the keys in that one. Yep, he would have complained by now. That's good. So what that's doing is that's going away to, yes, ChatGPT, to go and get that information, and goes, sure, here we go. And we've got all that detail. So that doesn't look too bad. Let's see if I can copy that and paste that in and show the rendering. Name, gender, date of birth, cool. Not bad? Okay. Make the contacts repeat. That's ChatGPT scratching its head, or me, one or the other. Goes, yes, so you'd need to set the repeat. So it's explaining what it's doing, it's giving me that, but I can't apply that. So as a JSON patch, and I'm hoping that it's going to tell me, here's a JSON patch to make that change to this definition. There we go, add. So we can see there that it's not repeating, so let's apply that. And now it's repeating. Yay, I'll clap to that. Cool. So yeah, if you want to go and play with that yourself, so there's settings in there. You'll need to go in and put in your own OpenAPI key. If you're not using OpenAPI and you've got your own Azure API, or you're running Ollama on your local device, put your path in here and specify which one of the models, and it'll use that. Highly recommend it. If you don't see it, come reach me after and we'll talk about how you get that fired up. So what I'm doing internally is I'm checking, is there data required for the query? I'll retrieve that data. So is this external content? So is this a resource type? Is it the questionnaire definition? Is it just a fragment of it? Evaluate that, verify the results that come back. So check it, is this a valid questionnaire fragment that it sent me? And then I'll run that through my internal validation engine and I'll check it and then go, well, that's not good enough, and then run it through the cycle again, so display the answer. So that's where you can reach me. I've got other sessions coming up. I hope that's been informative on what's going on. And yeah, questions. There you go. Question over here. Yep, there's one there.
I actually have maybe two questions. One
Yep.
is, if I have a PDF or paper form with question numbers, is there a way to link the question numbers to the questionnaire?
Yep, so inside the questionnaire, so if I go back, so to find that out, we'll go to the spec, and then under each of the questions, so there's a definition property which you can point. So if you've got a logical model or a structure definition or a profile that you're referencing to, you can link that through the definition. If you're going to a LOINC code or some other internal representation, then code is the property that you'd be putting it, which is probably what you're after.
The other question is validation. What if we have, say, custom validation that isn't like self-validation within the form, but it's going out to some other source of information? Is there a way to kind of denote some kind of custom validation?
So the FhirPath engine, so if you bring that content into the form, whether it's in hidden fields, then it becomes in scope. So you can do that. If you're wanting to go and reference to say, you've linked off to a reference to something and validate, does that exist? Or is this in a catalog? So the terminology side you can do, but if it's just random checking on other content, you're gonna be hit and miss if possible at all. Otherwise, you can do your own custom logic, which is perfectly valid on the server side too. Yep. So there was one. Yep.
So wonderful talk. You talked about the versions. So for us, one of the key thing is, especially some of these questionnaires, well, in the payer side, it's called the assessments.
Yep.
They have like hundreds of questions. And in the Medicaid space, the states actually publish those assessment forms. And we are supposed to transition the responses from the previous version to the next version. So is that like during the pre-population time, is that possible where you can specify, pull the responses from a previous version to the current version of the form?
That would be something you could do. So you would use whether it was, I'll add that as something to discuss in that pre-population section at the end of the week. But yeah, basically you can say during that pre-populate, pull from the previous version. So that is possible. But yeah, so you then sort of have to marry up what is appropriate to pull from the previous version. Is it older than 6 months? Is it that relevant? If it's your height and this, yeah, maybe that's probably relevant. But if I'm a 1-year-old, maybe the height from 12 years ago is
usually we'll have that
Yep.
knowledge ahead of time.
Yep.
Because they say like certain questions can be pre-populated because the data collected is less than 12 months.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you.
Yep. This one right up the back here. Yep.
What is the main power of a FHIR questionnaire over a custom-built form?
The main power to me is the fact that you can, if I can get away, that a custom-built forms engine works for you. The power of the random definition is I can run it in this engine, I can run it in this engine, I can run it in this engine, and I'll get the same result. When I get those results back, I can see those results, I can understand them and use them. If I want to get a result from someone else, I can say, here is the definition of my referral, and they can run and use it. When I build my own internal, I then have to go to each and every partner for each and every vendor, ... That's what I think. Cool, more questions? Diego.
I'm trying to help Fernando with the project, and he asked me what to use if you want some help for an item given to the person completing the form, like an info button.
So what was the question? So how can I provide guidance to a user on a question? Now, I did that not because I don't know, but because I just want to see what it's going to say, and I can keep talking while it goes and thinks. But you can put tooltips, so against an item, so when you go and wave the mouse over a specific item, lock that in there. So when you wave over it, it would show a tooltip to say this is what's going on. You can also include a help bit of text, which would sit beside it, or you can put display labels. So this display label that's there, what's it going to say? Item control, item with guidance. Yep, it's actually done pretty good. That's a help tooltip. And yeah, display hint, your date. Yeah, that's actually not too bad. I don't think it's exactly right, but it's not far off. But yeah, so you can provide that sort of detail. Cool. Oh, it's got more down here. Yep.
Great session, by the way.
Thank you.
To take action on the data that's provided by the user, like creating conditions as an example, is it expected that FHIR servers will implement that? Or is it expected that perhaps a third-party application would then analyze the responses? And
That's a great question. So the question is, once I've got that questionnaire response, is it expected that this should turn into a condition, or at what point is that? So I've got another session on Thursday which goes through a lot of that in more detail, but the short answer is it can be at the point of saving a questionnaire response. It could be part of the process where the questionnaire response never actually gets stored and just automatically goes through and becomes the other content. So it really depends on what's the workflow involved. And there's a handful of different engines, so structure maps, observations, and definition-based rules which describe how that can occur. So which is cool. So yeah, there we go.
Can you ask if I need to, part of my workflow, one of the answers is on a picture that I plan to send to as a binary to a FHIR server. And as an answer, it should be the reference to the
So that would be via the attachment.
But can I put the reference if I don't send already the questionnaire? I need to, in the middle of the questionnaire, I suppose I have to send it to the file server in advance, the picture, and then...
Yeah, so typically with the pictures in the assessments, that they'd get stored as the base 64 encoded binary inside the attachment. And so that's the usual way that I've seen it done. And so if I go and attach that, I wonder, do I have a picture that's... those are all huge. Oh, I guess I can still click it. There we go, so that's... Yeah, don't save that resource, but yeah, you get the idea. So you can attach it. But yeah, cool. Well, given that, we've got a couple of moments left. So I had one more thing which was kind of funky, if I've still got it. So we had a bit of a hack week to try out some other user interactions with getting patient content. I know there's some other sessions that have got other people doing stuff this week. Go and see them all. I know I will be. So this is a specific form that I created to try and prototype using ChatGPT to take a question. And so when I click into the field, it goes and looks inside an IPA document to actually read out the content. And so I could show you the IPA document. But yeah, so full name, it actually read that correct. It read the family name correct, that looks pretty good. It read the given name, which is pretty cool. That was weird. It's decided BR and it said, nah, that's not right, you don't have a middle name. So maybe not quite right. Who thinks it'll get title right? Is that a title? That's a title, isn't it? It's not the title I was expecting, but it's the patient summary as at that date. That is a title. So that's just a good learning that when it asks for stuff, it's going to give you what you ask it for, or something similar. So there was that in there, did like it. And the other thing that I learned from this expression was that was a horrible experience. It would have been better if it sort of prompted up something and said, here is the name Britannical, this came from the patient's actual name, it wasn't a contact or it wasn't the doctor's name. So you get to see the context and allow the user to go, yep, that's right, or select. And so therefore, when I went in that title, it would have gone, yeah, I'm not going to put that in there. So whilst it's not a good result, it was a good bit of research to work out, yeah, don't do this. Of course, your mileage may vary. But again, thank you very much for that. Cool.